Man, I just love sometimes worshiping with you guys. Is one of my favorite things to just hear your voices. And so thanks for singing. I want to ask you a question that I think that we all know the answer to this, but have you ever had a moment where you were talking to someone and they weren't listening? Ask your small group leader. They know what that feels like, okay? All right? And I want you to think about that for a second. It's really one of the most unpleasant things that you can experience, right? When you are talking to someone and you realize that they're not listening. Maybe you've had a moment where you've had a dropped call, right? Where you've been talking on the phone and all of a sudden you're waiting for somebody's response. You're like, oh, they're not there anymore, right? They're not listening. A couple months ago, I was playing some video games with my friends. We're playing online, and so we all had headsets. We were talking to each other. And all of a sudden, I realized that one of my friends, his character wasn't moving, right? And so we're like, well, that's strange. What happened? And then all of a sudden, we hear snoring through our headset. And I'm like, this dude has fallen asleep while we were supposed to be gaming together. As we're all talking and interacting, he's fallen asleep. And we still make fun of him for that. I'm embarrassed to say this, but sometimes my wife will be talking to me. And she'll look at me, and apparently she has asked me a question. And I got no idea what she asked, right? I wasn't listening, okay? Some of you will know what that's like sometime down the road. But this happens from time to time where you'll be talking to someone, or maybe you've been in a conversation, you realize I wasn't listening or they weren't listening. And I don't know, can some of you recognize that sometimes you're the one that's guilty of that, right? Sometimes you can be more just preoccupied with maybe your phone or something that's in front of you than you are listening to the person that's talking to you. Being unheard is so frustrating. It can be so frustrating for all of us. And that feeling is something that none of us like, and it can be demoralizing. And sometimes, honestly, in certain situations, it can be downright hurtful, right? When maybe you've been trying to talk to someone and you realize they just don't care, they just aren't paying attention. I wonder in your relationship with God if you've asked that type of question. I bet for many of us, as a part of your faith journey, as a part of maturing as a Christian, at some point along the line, whether it's right now or in the past, you've probably asked this question: when life hurts, is God listening? Does he hear our prayers? Does he hear everything that we say? Does he care? Those type of questions. And I think maybe like on a basic level as like a Christian, we would all know the answer to that. Like, of course, God hears our prayers. But then going beneath the surface, you have to wonder, well, how do I know that's true? And how can I feel that that is true? When life hurts, is God listening? Maybe just in general, does he hear my prayers? How can I know those things for sure? Here's why I think this question matters. I don't think that any of us will experience the type of relationship with God that we were meant and supposed to have, that you were designed to have, until you can truly, with 100% certainty, believe that God hears your prayers. If you don't have a full conviction that that is true, you will never have the type of relationship that God wants you to have with him. And so this is important. As we wrap up this series, we've been talking about I have questions. We've been looking at things that maybe we've all wrestled with as a part of our faith. This is what I want to talk to you about tonight. Is God listening? Does he hear our prayers? And I want to dig a little bit into that. So our text tonight is going to come from King David. Now, I think most of you know who King David is, but in case you don't, David was the second king of Israel. If we go all the way back, I don't know, from now it'd be about 3,000 years, to where the nation of Israel, God's people, they had a king, and David was the second king for this nation. And David, one of the coolest things that we learn about his life is not only do we get a chronicle of like all the battles and the things that he did, but he wrote so many psalms that we get a glimpse into his mind and into his heart. We get to learn how he processed his faith and all those type of things. And so what we're going to look at tonight is one of the words that David as king wrote down. It's from Psalm 139. But before we read that, I want to remind you, all these things are in YouVersion. And so if you got a Bible app, you can not only see all of our text in there, but there's also some pictures that you can grab and put on your own social or whatever. But at the very least, it's one of those things where you can hop into the car and tell your mom and dad, well, yeah, here's what I learned tonight, right? So you can find that in the YouVersion Bible app. Here's our text, Psalm 139. Again, this is King David, verses 1 through 4. Here's what he says. He says, "You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my laying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. When we talk about prayers, it's easy to over-spiritualize this conversation and to talk about things that just complicate this. And what I want to do tonight is try to make this a little bit more simple for all of us. And so I just have two ideas to help us process this question. The first thing I want you to understand is this, is that you should talk to God about your struggle. Now, I don't think that would be a surprising thing for many of us to understand this truth, but one of the things I find so fascinating about these verses from Psalm 139 is that David points out some of the things that we've already talked about, some of the truths that we've already discovered, specifically this idea that God is omniscient. And that's what we said last week. We believe that God knows everything, right? There's nothing that God can learn that he doesn't already know. And so we believe that God knows everything. He knows everything that's going to happen. And beyond that, he knows everything that we are thinking. So God knows your heart. He knows your thoughts. He knows your actions. And because of that truth, we believe that God does listen to you because he does hear you. We believe that God hears you and he wants to hear about your struggle. God knows you. He knows everything about your life. And I'm saying the same thing over and over, but I need you to understand this reality. He knows the deepest part of you, and he wants to hear about it. About a week ago, my daughter Willow came home from school, and she's in kindergarten, and she came home with a piece of paper that was her very first, I don't even know what they call it, but it was like a bad report, okay? She had done something in school that she wasn't supposed to. Now, my wife, she's a teacher at the same school, not her teacher, but a teacher at the same school. And so she knew about this report, obviously, and she brought it home, and she told me what Willow did. It wasn't anything bad. She didn't, cut some girl's hair or anything like that, but she did something that the teacher told her not to, and so she got a bad report. And so I'm sitting at the dinner table, and I know what she'd done, and I asked her, I said, Willow, hey, so what happened at school today? I heard you got in trouble. And she got really angry, right? She got real mad. She did not want to talk about it. She shut down and she was like, I don't want to talk about it. I was like, well, I want to hear from your side, what happened and what went on. I want to help you. And she just shut down. And it was so silly because I already knew what happened, right? I already knew what the report was. I already knew. My wife already told me what happened. And so I knew the situation. I just wanted to hear it from her. I wanted to hear her side. I wanted to hear what she thought happened, or I want to hear what she was going to do next. And then I just wonder sometimes if this is how God feels with us sometimes. He knows you. He knows your sin. He knows your struggle. He knows the ways that you fall short. There's nothing that you can do to hide anything from God. He is omniscient. And so it's silly, it's foolish for us to think that if we don't talk about it, then maybe God won't acknowledge it or know about it. It's so silly. God knows everything. He just wants to hear from you. He just wants to hear it from your side. He wants to talk with you about it to help you process it on your side. And I think that's how I felt with her, and I wonder if that's how God feels with us sometimes. So he already knows. He just wants to hear from you. When Jesus taught about prayer, he said something that's so encouraging. Look what he says in Luke chapter 11. Jesus says, so I say to you, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks the door will be opened. And above anybody else, if there's anybody that we should listen to about prayer, it's Jesus, right? He is God, right? And he had the closest relationship in a triune unity type relationship with God that he should know about talking with God. And here's what he says. Just ask. If you've got something, just ask. The one who asks receives. The one who knocks, the door will be opened. And I just need us to understand that God is a good God. He's not looking to scold you. He's not looking to punish you. He wants to help you through your struggle. And so we need to talk to God in the midst of our struggle. Just come to him. And so I want to encourage you tonight, just in this truth, that when you have pain, when you have struggle, when you have things in your life that you are dealing with, instead of hiding them, instead of just not acknowledging them, go to God with them. In fact, go to him first. Is what I encourage you to do. There's a lot of places that you can go to with your struggle. There's a lot of people you could turn to. There's a lot of websites that you could turn to. There's a lot of things that you can go to deal with your struggle. I want to encourage you to go to God first to see if you could find what you're looking for. So, to answer our question, is God listening? The answer has to be yes. Yes, God always hears you. So going back to look at verse 4 of what we read from Psalm 139, it says this, before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. I love that verse because it reminds us of this great truth. God always hears you because he hears you before you even speak. It's kind of a weird thing to think about, right? That before you even speak what you need to say to God or pray what you need to pray to him, he already knows. He already knows what's in your heart. He already knows what you are going to say. In fact, Matthew chapter 6, verse 8, it's not on the screen, but it says that God knows what you need before you even ask him. God knows what you need before you even ask him. And so to answer our question, yes, God always hears you. Why? Because he hears you before you even verbalize it. He hears you within your thoughts, within your mind, within your own inner self. God knows you better than you know yourself. And before you even ask, he knows what you need. I think sometimes we struggle to believe that God hears us because maybe we view prayer sometimes like a megaphone. And so if you have one of these megaphones, you would use this to grab the attention of whoever you can speak to, right? If I were to use this right now, which I'm not going to, okay? If I were to use this in the same way that I have the microphone on, right? I am speaking to you to make sure that you can hear me. If I'm using this, it means I'm probably in a place that we can't hear each other mutually well, right? Like, I need to use this so that everyone can hear what I have to say. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I can hear what that person has to say and what that person has to say. Sometimes we use prayer like a megaphone, where we just speak and speak and speak, and to make sure whoever is up there listening can hear. And I wonder if instead of using a megaphone for our prayers, if we thought of it like a headphone. Now, don't laugh at me. I know that nobody uses headphones like this. Y'all have AirPods and Bluetooth things, okay? But just imagine this. Sometimes we think about prayer as like, what can I say, what can I say, what can I say? I'm praying to God. Maybe sometimes prayer should be like headphones. When you use headphones, what do you use headphones for? To block out the rest of the noise? To focus on what you're trying to hear, right? So you're not distracted by everything else? When was the last time you thought about prayer as, what can I hear from God? It's a mutual relationship. There's a two-way street here. Not only do we pray to God, but in prayer, we need to hear what he has for us as well. I want you to consider that tonight. Because if you continue to use a megaphone, it's going to be really hard to hear what the other end is saying. And so maybe within prayer, you can think about, what can I hear from God? Apostle John wrote something very, very important for us. In 1 John chapter 5, he says this, "This is the confidence we have in approaching God, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us." God always hears you. He always hears you, and not only that, he wants to hear from you about your struggle, about your pain, whatever you're going through, whatever predicament you find yourself in. So what I want you to feel tonight is this truth, that you should talk to God about everything in your life. Now, that could be a daunting task, because there are parts of my life that I don't want to talk to anybody about, that I want to hide. But this is the reality of what it looks like to have a relationship with God. When you can learn how to do this, when you can learn how to do this, I believe that everything in your relationship with God can change. I really believe this, because God is going to be with you for the rest of your life. The rest of your life, God is going to be walking in step with you when you have a relationship with him. And so the sooner that you can learn how to do this, to communicate, to talk to God about everything in your life, the sooner that you can do this, the better off you will be. Imagine this. The God of the universe, the God that created everything, the God that made the galaxies, our earth, everything that we don't even know or have seen, the God that makes every living thing, every single thing that you know has an existence because of Jesus Christ. That God wants to hear from you, wants to have a relationship with you, wants you to pray to him, and is listening to you. He wants you to speak to him. I'm asking you tonight just to be open and honest in your conversation, your relationship with God. When life hurts, remember that God is always listening to you. In Jerusalem, there is a wall that people visit from all over the world. It's called the Western Wall. Maybe you've heard of it. It's also called the Wailing Wall. And people from all over the world will come to this wall and pour out their hearts in prayer to God, because this wall was once part of the temple that housed God's his presence among the people until Jesus Christ came and lived on the earth. And so this wall was significant to people. And all over the world, people come to this wall and they pray to God. And they write down their prayers and they stick it in the wall. And so you can find years and years worth of tiny scraps of paper lodged into every nook and cranny of that wall, as people come and they write down their prayers believing that God hears them. Because we believe that God hears us, tonight we are going to practice what thousands of people do as they visit the Western Wall, but we're going to do it in our own space. This series we've talked about some heavy questions. I think some heavy questions that we all wrestle with, and maybe you have some other questions. Maybe I didn't answer everything for you satisfactory, and maybe you're still wrestling with some of this stuff, or maybe there was a question that you go, I still have this question about God or about Jesus or about how all this fits together, and I want you to know that's okay. God can handle your questions. He can handle your doubt. He can handle your struggle. He can handle all of this. But what I want to do is give you the space to respond, to express that, and to pray those things to God, believing that he hears your prayers. And so I want to invite you to respond tonight in this way. As you come up over here to our Western Wall, which faces east, at the table there's scraps of paper and markers. And I wanted to invite you to do one of two things. One, if there's a question that you feel like your relationship with God, there's still something there that you go, man, I just don't understand this. I don't get this. I need to understand this for my faith to move forward. If you still have something unanswered, write that question down. Or maybe you just need, for whatever reason, to express a prayer, knowing and believing that God hears it. And I know this is symbolic. You could do that in your seat, but I'm asking you to do what thousands of people do across the world, is to write it down and to put it on the wall, believing that God hears us. And so in a moment, the team is going to come back up here and play a song, and they're going to give you the space to do that. But I also want to invite you and to remember that this is a moment of response. And so whatever that looks like for you, maybe you need to grab it and come back to your seat and pray and be in a moment with God and write that down and then go put it on the wall. Maybe you need to grab that, write it down, and ask your small group leader to spend a minute praying with you before you stick it on the wall. Or maybe you just do it in your own way. I want to invite you to use the space as you want to, however you need to. But when you're ready and you have a prayer, believing that God hears you, go up to the wall, write it down, and stick it on the wall. Spend a moment believing not only can God hear you, but he's okay with your questions. He's okay with your doubt.